Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart podcast with me, James Delingpole. And my very special guest this week is called David Craig, who has just co-written the most brilliant and utterly damning book on further education I think I've read recently. It's called The Great University Con, and it just systematically takes apart everything that's wrong with the university system in Britain. And actually, probably, David, I imagine what you say applies quite a bit also to places like America, doesn't it, as well? Has academia been similarly tainted in the US?
I'm not sure that's true. Many of the advanced countries have done exactly the same as Britain's done. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, in putting about 45 to 50% of school leavers through university, and have been successful with that policy. It has been a disaster in Britain, not because the policy itself is wrong, but because the way it's been implemented and the self-interest and the greed and the incompetence of the universities have made it into a failure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've just told me that you were at Cambridge and I was at Oxford. But we were at university in the days when the undergraduate experience was very, very different. I mean, a tiny minority of the population went to university in those days.
Yes, when we were at university, probably one out of school leavers went to university. Now it's about one out of every two. The number of people going to university has gone up from about 700,000 30 years ago to over 2.3 million now. It is the whole university sector has become a monster in terms of its size and the amount of resources and the amount of young people's time and money that it's using. Yes.
Well, that... Did you say 2.1 million?
It's 2.32 million.
2.3 million. I mean, call me a snob, but how many of these people are actually fitted for further education?
Probably about a quarter. There are several reasons I say this. The number has gone up from, say, 700,000 to about 2.3 million. Mm-hmm. The way we've achieved that is not by increasing the intellectual capacity of British youth. For example, now around 51% of all people going to university are getting in on 3 Ds at A-level or worse. Leeds Metropolitan University during 1 year had 97 courses on which you only needed 2 E's at A-level in order to go to university. So one way we've increased the numbers is this huge drop in the bar that you need to get over to get a place at university and to be able to borrow up to £50,000 of taxpayers' money.
£50,000, which presumably a lot of this stuff is never going to get paid back because these people are never going to get jobs which pay enough to recoup their costs.
There are various estimates. At the moment, there's about 100 billion in student loans which are outstanding, and that amount goes up by about 12.5 billion every year. The latest estimates by the Institute for Fiscal Studies is that 83% of graduates will fail to pay back their loans in full, and my estimates are around 50% will pay nothing back at all. So of this 100 billion, which will be 200 billion by 2030, at least 100 billion, which is pretty much the budget for the NHS for a year, will be dumped back on taxpayers.
Whoa. Right. And yet we're told that somehow it's worth it because we are creating a sort of educated populace, civilized?
The huge expansion in higher education started in 1963 after something called the Robbins Report, and that proposed that anybody who was qualified by ability and attainment should be allowed to go to university. And then, of course, more lately, the Blair government picked that up and set this target of half of all people going to university, which is fine. And the reason behind it was to assume that the more educated the population is, the more people who have degrees, then the better society would function, the better jobs they'll get, the more wealth would be created. And that is probably what could have happened and would have happened if the expansion of the universities had been handled in an intelligent, in a competent, and in a proper way.
Right. So how should we have done it?
Well, for example, despite the fact the number of students have tripled over the last 30 years, we have less people studying engineering, chemistry, maths, and other what one might call serious subjects, or the STEM subjects. We have less people now studying those than we had 30 years ago, when we had a third the number of students. But there's been massive growth in photography, sports science, drama, creative this, that, and the other. Gender studies,
my favourite.
And so on. Absolutely massive growth.
Yeah.
And these subjects will not be contributing to society. The people studying won't get jobs. They'll never probably earn above the £25,000 when they would start repaying their loans. And they will be saddled with this massive debt of £50,000, £60,000 a person for 30 years of their working lives.
Plus, they'll be turned into grisly human beings. I mean, wouldn't you say that one can be educated into stupidity? And gender studies is a classic example of this. It teaches you to look at the world anew through a filter of resentment, bitterness. I mean, who would want to ever employ a gender studies student? I mean, you know she's going to be a complete bitch. You know she's going to try and take you to an industrial tribunal. She's going to be a nightmare.
Absolutely not. I bet there's loads of NHS hospitals and government bodies that are just thirsting to employ these people into totally useless non-jobs where they earn quite comfortable salaries at our expense, causing total chaos for us normal people.
Yes, you're right. Probably they'll be employed in the human resources department by other gender studies graduates. I mean, that's how it works, isn't it?
Absolutely, and they'll contribute to positive discrimination by one-legged, lesbian, coloured, trans, LGBT, IGQ, RST, whatever. Getting more of those wonderful people into the organisation, regardless of whether they have the skills to do the jobs that they're being employed to do.
Yes. Now, can I just have a brief digression before we go back to your amazing facts about this scandal? You and I are sitting currently, you can hear the low murmur of traffic rumbling past, and that's because we're in Oxford, sitting between by the river between two roads, and this is my alma mater, and I hate coming back to Oxford now because I think it's like finding that Wonderland has been turned into an industrial estate. But yesterday I was reading the papers and I saw this story about an Oxford English Don who had been forcibly retired by his college authorities, and he'd been teaching English at the college for 39 years, I think it was, and his speciality was Shakespeare, Renaissance and Elizabethan literature, i.e. the kind of thing that ought to be at the very core of the English curriculum at Oxford. And they were getting rid of him to make way for a more diverse representation in the academic staff. I mean, they actually said this. And I was thinking to myself, gosh, I wonder what kind of diversity they're looking for here. And I thought instantly of the ghastly woman Don, I forget, or supervisor as you call them in Cambridge, I forget her name, ghastly race-baiting woman at your alma mater, Churchill College, Cambridge, also teaches English, but her speciality is colonial literature and no doubt sort of race-baiting resentment and stuff. And I'm thinking, actually, what use is a woman trained in colonial literature on an English course? Shouldn't they be doing Donne, Milton, Chaucer, stuff like that? That's what they should be learning. If you don't learn that stuff at Oxford and Cambridge on the English course, then isn't it all over? Isn't it game over for everything?
Well, in a sense, Oxford and Cambridge and some of the London colleges have, in general, preserved their intellectual integrity. The real problem, the dumbing down of our education system and has happened at the newer universities.
Right.
Oxford and Cambridge, for example, have only in the same time as other universities have tripled the number of students. Oxford and Cambridge have only increased it by 2 or 3%.
Right.
So they've held to the basic academic principles that people should be capable of studying in order to go there. Oxford and Cambridge aren't amongst the group of universities who let you in with 2 E's at A level.
No.
So they still are amongst the top 100 universities, world universities, in the ratings.
Yeah.
The problem is the bottom 60, 70, 80 new universities, the new universities where all the expansion has occurred, who've expanded these easy to teach, cheap as chips courses. Psychology, of course, is a great one. We've got about 17,000 psychology graduates each year, and there are about 750 training places for them.
Ooh, can I briefly interrupt there? Guess what the speciality of the principal of St John's College, the woman who decided that this English Dom was no longer suitable. Guess what she majored in?
Nuclear physics?
Nearly. Psychology.
Okay.
Psychology.
Close.
So she did kind of Mickey Mouse studies, the medical equivalent thereof, and now she's in charge of deciding who sits on the academic staff at St John's, which, by the way, used to be one of the most academically rigorous colleges in Oxford, and is one of the richest. But what's the point? What is the bloody point?
Well, one situation that's been described to me, and I haven't checked it, but it seems to be right, is that the unions, academic unions, have ensured similar salaries for all professors and lecturers or whatever of different levels.
Right.
So a professor, of course, in media studies is likely to be paid roughly the same as a professor in mathematics or nuclear physics, or
really,
which is beyond belief, because it doesn't reflect their chance of getting a job in the open market. For example, I suggest cynically that a professor of gender studies is less likely to be able to get a job than a physicist or a chemist.
Yeah.
And secondly, of course, the value that they're providing to society, I again very cynically suggest that gender studies is providing slightly less value than physics, chemistry, or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that is completely absurd. These people should be paid according to the value that they're providing, not according to levels, to some kind of bar of diversity and equality.
Tell me about. I often read in the newspapers about these really spivvy-looking vice-chancellors at the universities. I saw one the other day posing with his expensive car. It seems to me that these people are paid extraordinary amounts of money to do what exactly?
Well, the university, the image of the university has changed over the last 20 or 30 years. Previously, universities were centres of academic excellence. They've now become corporate, managerial, profit-making institutions. What they want to do is cram in as many students as possible. They don't give a damn if these students will get jobs or not. That's not the point. The point is the £9,250 a year fees they will get from each student. And so they now see themselves as CEOs.
Yes.
Rather than vice-chancellors, and therefore they're saying, well, we want CEO salaries, we want £450,000-500,000 a year, plus free lodging, plus perks, plus a few gongs and an honour at the end of the day, all that kind of stuff. And they as justification, they'll point to the profitability of their institutions rather than its academic rankings.
But wait, hang on. Profitability, where's this money coming from? It's coming ultimately from borrowed money, but borrowed from the taxpayer, ultimately.
Well, the government is doing a typical Gordon Brownian trick. This is what Gordon Brown did when he did his private finance initiative, when he built all the hospitals, supposedly free of charge because private companies were paying for them, but now we're going to be paying for them for the next 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
We're getting the same trick of deferred debt with universities. The fees have gone up from 3,000 to 9,250 in most cases. The students, even with their 2 E's at A level, and sometimes even 1 E, are allowed to borrow up to 50 grand for 3 years. They don't have to start repaying it till they're earning over £25,000.
Right.
Half of them will never repay much of their, or any at all. And then within the next 10, 15 years, this massive debt of unpaid loans will be dumped on the taxpayer. Meanwhile, all our politicians will have comfortably retired with their taxpayer-funded pensions and a few directorships and a few gongs as well. So they don't really care.
Yes, yes. Now, my daughter who is super bright, she got like 11 A stars in her GCSEs, is now saying to me something worrying, but maybe you think it's this shows how sensible she is. She's saying, why do I want to go to university when I'm going to leave with these massive debts? I'm just going to fritter away my 3 years. I mean, is she right? If she's bright, is it still worth going to university if you go to a good one?
If you go to a serious university and do a serious degree, you are making a great investment, and it will give you a much more satisfying career and a much more satisfying life. If you're off to study media studies, social studies, creative arts, design at the University of Nowhere, then you are absolutely being taken for a ride. You've been conned.
Right.
So I must admit, about a year ago, a friend told me his son was not going to university, but was going to do an apprenticeship in the city instead. And I was amazed. I thought, well, but surely you want to go to university. But then I started writing my book, The Great University Con.
Yeah.
And now I realize this guy was smart. And it's all the suckers are the 250,000 or so school leavers who've just celebrated getting their A-levels, who are off to do Mickey Mouse degrees at third-rate universities, dumbed-down courses, and then they're going to go onto the job market and find out nobody wants me.
I was particularly taken with the stat in your book about the massive oversupply of law graduates. You'd think law would be a sort of solid vocational degree that would guarantee you a well-paid job.
Absolutely, it's truly astonishing. In subjects like forensic science, about 1 in 100 or 1 in every 200 graduates will get a job in the field.
Yeah.
Psychology, 1 in every 100, 1 in every 200. But even law, we've got about 23,000 students each year studying law, and there are only 5,700 training places in solicitors and in barristers' firms for these people. So, and what's even worse is that quite thousands, I don't know how many, of people who study things like English and history and other wonderful stuff like that are taking 1-year conversion courses, which are quite expensive, in law because they think this will give them a job. Not a hope. The only people who get jobs will be a few law graduates from Durham and a few Russell Group universities in Oxford and Cambridge.
Yeah.
The rest haven't a chance. In fact, I phoned up a medical helpline a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
One of these accident things. Phone us up and we'll sue everybody you know.
Yeah.
And the guy I was speaking to was a law graduate.
How did you find that out?
Well, I asked him what he did, and just for a chat, and he said he's a graduate in law. And then I said, well, did many people on your course get a job? He said, no. He said, unless you know somebody who knows someone within a solicitor's or a barrister's firm, you don't have a chance.
Yeah. Just going back to the thing about the forensic sciences degree. I remember when that degree became fashionable, and you call it a CSI degree.
Yeah.
Because it's a sort of thing you can imagine if you're 17 and you're trying to decide what to go study at university. Hey, being one of those forensic scientists where you look at the body and try and work out the cause of death, just like on TV. You can see why they're drawn to it.
Absolutely. One police chief to quote, said, a forensic science degree, a CSI degree, is a savage waste of young people's time and their parents' money.
I shouldn't laugh, but
there are about 7,000 or 8,000 forensic science students, as I understand it, and there are only 2,000 people who work in forensic science in Britain.
Right.
And not all of them are going to retire next week. So these 8,500 students in forensic sciences, they're not going to get jobs. They haven't got a chance.
What if they all start suing the educational system for perpetrating this con against them? Can they do that?
Well, this is what's coming in America, which of course everybody sues everyone. A large group of law graduates are suing their universities for misrepresenting the chances of them getting jobs.
Are they? So it is a problem in America. You said it wasn't a problem in America. It obviously is a problem in America as well, to a degree.
Yes, I haven't studied the American market, so I don't know so much about that.
Yeah.
But we've already had at Cambridge Anglia Ruskin University. Apparently, when you arrive at Cambridge Station, I've been told there's a sign up saying "Home of Anglia Ruskin University."
Lol.
They don't mention another academic institution at Cambridge, which is possibly slightly better known than Anglia Ruskin.
Indeed.
Anyway, this business graduate who got a first in a degree, she sued the university for misleading her onto a qualification that she found was completely useless.
Yes, I can see that. Well, she thought she was going to Cambridge, and in fact she was going to Cambridge Anglia Ruskin.
No, but even then, she knew she was doing business,
Yeah.
and she got a first because she was bright. And she was amazed to find that Britain's top companies and banks and whatever really had no interest in somebody with a business degree from Cambridge Anglia Ruskin University.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me like a moment. Why do these people imagine that unless you go to one of the Russell Group universities, you're going to get a decent job?
Because they're lied to. All the universities, there's several websites which students use to decide which university they're going to go to. And these websites on each course have to give the employment level and the average salary 2 or 3 years after graduation. And they're all claiming 75, 80% or whatever. But they don't say what jobs these people have got. And if was it 1 in 4 childminders now has a degree? 1 in 5 theme park attendants has a degree, and so on. Those people would count as employed. So you don't actually know when you're applying to universities that these 75% employment of those, maybe 5, 10, 15% might actually have jobs in the thing that their degree trained them for. You just don't know.
Dear, no wonder the youth are so bitter.
No, this is a mis-selling scandal that will make PFI look like small beer. We are mis-selling to our youth. We're telling them, get a degree and you'll get something called the graduate premium.
Yeah.
The graduate premium is, if you get a degree, you'll earn this much more during your working life than if you didn't have a degree. Number of problems. First of all, the graduate premium was a marketing gimmick thought up by Blair's government, and they quoted a figure of £400,000 over a working life. This was absolute rubbish. It was then knocked down to £160,000, then to £108,000. But it's complete rubbish because it was worked out when there were half as many graduates, when there was much more demand for graduates, and before the economic crisis of 2008, which has massively reduced graduate salaries, as has the oversupply of graduates. So it is total rubbish. It is mis-selling beyond belief. But people don't know that because, they haven't written books like I have, where I've actually had to analyse the figures.
Yeah. You're listening to Delingpole, a Breitbart podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my special guest, David Craig, co-author of The Great University con?
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
I said that it's the epitome of hypocrisy. Unless you fall in line with their liberal agenda, this uniparty, globalist, liberal agenda, they will never support you. They use the whole gender issue, of course, as some kind of tool to prop up their messaging, but it's the phoniest thing.
Sirius XM Patriot Channel 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to Delingpole, a Breitbart podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, David Craig, author of The Great University Con. You mentioned Tony Blair, and you mentioned that his government told a lie about the graduate premium that apparently you'd experience if you went to university.
Well, Tony Blair's government told lies about many things.
I was going to say, colour me shocked, David. Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised they didn't say it would take you 45 minutes to get a degree, but...
Well, let me ask you, because one of my more interesting podcast guests was Peter Hitchens, who advanced this very interesting theory on Tony Blair, which I found quite credible, which is that Tony Blair was much more of a Trotskyite than he let on. He was really quite hard left at university, and like a lot of hard leftists, he buried his true sympathies and infiltrated the system. What do you think of the theory that the reason that Blair expanded further education was as a way of brainwashing the youth with the sort of the neo-Marxist, postmodernist values of that we see in the world today?
A rather smart person who has a lot of money now once taught me that in life, the incompetence is usually the source of most things rather than conspiracy.
Right.
And I genuinely believe the policy of half of people going to university is a policy that's been adopted by many other Western countries.
Right.
So I don't believe in itself it was an evil Dr. Doom manipulation of our youth. However, that is what's happened. We have got dumbed down universities hollowing out their degrees. I think it's now 2/3 of all graduates. When I was at university, if you got a 2-1, that was really good. Now 2/3 of all graduates get a first or a 2-1.
That's rubbish, isn't it? That really is.
Well, when I was at university, 1/3 of graduates got a first or a 2-1.
Yeah.
Now it's 2/3. So if you go onto the job market now and say, "Hey, look at me! I got a 2-1 from Durham," they'll say, "Well, yeah, but we've got another 1,000 people who got first from Durham, so it's not of interest." And if you've got a 2-2, well, it's a joke, basically. Why would anybody employ someone with a 2-2?
Yes.
Nowadays, when you can take your pick from all the firsts and the 2-1s?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've got quite a few of our family friends have sent their children off to university in the US rather than the UK, and they report back that going to US university is a bit like going back to school. It's much more regimented. They have much more regular classes. They're taught much more, which strikes me as kind of slightly sort of not what I went to university for. But on the other hand, it's probably a lot better than what they get now, because they didn't get taught at all, do they, in UK universities?
Well, even though university fees have gone up from $3,000 a year to the $9,250, on a lot of courses, the amount of direct teaching has halved. On a comparison of advanced countries, European countries, British university students do less hours work per week than almost any other country in Europe.
Was it 30 hours a week? I saw.
I think we do about 29 hours a week compared to 35, 40, 45 for other countries.
Right, and I bet America's a lot more.
Probably.
They seem to work their asses off in America.
Yeah, probably, because America is a more competitive place. It's a bit dog eat dog, so I would expect they're pushed a bit harder.
Yes, but I think the one problem that American universities and Australian universities and European universities probably and British universities all share is this. You only dedicate a small space to this in the book, but snowflake culture. I mean, it's a problem, isn't it?
Yes, a study by was one Spike, a student organisation, found that over 90% of universities now have active censorship on campus about what you can say, what you can't say. There are no platforming speakers, tearing down statues, even demanding cafeteria menus get their names changed because calling something Caribbean is apparently cultural appropriation. Appropriation. We seem to. It's not a lie. As we've put so many more people into university, the average intellectual level of our students has fallen.
Yes.
That is a necessary consequence. We haven't become much more intelligent as a country. And with a lower intellectual level, our universities have become mechanized degree factories, pushing through clone students. And whereas students used to be known for their protesting and their questioning, now they all have a Bible of political correctness and things that are allowed to be said, and they all adhere to this Bible. It's quite extraordinary achievement to have turned universities from a place which encourages free speech to a place which absolutely censors free speech.
Yes, well, I had an interesting variant of that at Cambridge, your alma mater, where I went to speak a few months ago. And the impression I got, they're not stupid, these kids, the kids who go to Cambridge or Oxford. I wasn't looking at them thinking, duh, you really don't deserve to be there intellectually. But I was thinking they don't deserve to be there in terms of their moral courage. For example, when I went to Cambridge, I had to speak at the dinner of CUCA, Cambridge University Conservative Association, which you would have thought would be a sort of bastion of soundness in a sea of political correctness. And it's true that I spoke to some likeable, intelligent students who were undergraduates, who were resisting all this kind of PC, SJW nonsense. But even though I established that most of them in their heart did not share the kind of social justice warrior views, I was struck by how many of them went along with them to get along. That they, rather than resist, they found it easier to just kind of censor themselves.
Yeah, there's one journalist who's coined the expression the Stepford students.
Oh, Brendan O'Neill, yeah.
And
he's a podcast regular. We love Brendan.
Right, and this was his impression when he went to university to speak, that he said they look like students, they dress like students, they smell like students, but their student brains have been replaced by brains bereft of critical faculties and programmed to conform.
Yeah. Well, that has certainly been my experience. And do you know what the really sad thing is? I know that lots and lots of undergraduates around the country are massive fanboys and fangirls of this podcast, and they like the fact that I just talk about conservative ideas, sometimes with my brother Dick, sometimes with celebrities, sometimes whoever, with intellectuals and what have you, and they agree with all this stuff I'm saying, and yet when push comes to shove, they're not prepared to fight for it. Now, I thought the job of students, one of the things, was to fight against the stupidities of the time, to protest against injustice, whereas this lot seem to be entrenching it.
The student body has changed. Now, the university is a mechanized degree factory.
Yeah.
You go there, you do what we call satisficing, you get your 2-1, and then you get out, and then you hopefully get a graduate job.
Satisficing, so doing just enough work to
survive,
to not get bollocked, not get sent down.
Yes.
But you can't even get sent down anyway, because they want you on the course paying the money, don't they?
Absolutely. One university was, I think they were getting 16, even students with 16% in their first year exams were moving on to the second year. They absolutely, and in another university, as Bournemouth, the the financial director sent out a message to all the academics marking exams to mark up as much as possible, because the loss of each student was a financial loss for the university, and they wanted to keep as many students in the university for the 3 years as possible, because that maximised revenue and it maximised profits.
So this book is comprehensive in its damn. You don't really have a good word to say about the university system in Britain, do you? I don't think.
No, I say that the top universities with the serious degrees who have retained their academic integrity, by and large, will provide an excellent education, which will get you a job, or else help you develop as a person if you're just doing it out of interest.
Yeah.
But I believe that, say, out of the 160 universities and top colleges and colleges, probably more than half have become corporate, self-serving, profit-seeking, cram them in, pile them high. Who cares about whether they get jobs or not? Just get the money.
But we don't mind, because I know you're of an economic persuasion with me. We don't mind profit, but this is a fake market. This is crony capitalism. This is not.
Yes, there is nothing wrong with universities trying to get profit. What we need is some honesty for the students, saying that university, that course, there's going to be 1,000 of you applying for every job.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you want to do it and you want to learn about criminology, excellent, but don't expect it to lead it anywhere, and then think about the £60,000 you've got to pay back.
But once we've created this massive bureaucracy, and there are so many people now in the employment of the academic sector, aren't there? And so many landlords who depend on it, etc., etc. You couldn't unwind this without causing massive disruption, could you?
Well, the unwinding has maybe started to happen very, very slowly. There is a demographic dip at the moment, the number of 18, 19-year-olds, and this has caused a drop in the number of people applying to universities, and it's caused absolute desperation in the universities, because I think in 2012 there were 2,700 unconditional offers made to students. This year there were about over 60,000. So the universities were just saying, we don't care if you can't even write your name on your level sheet, we'll give you a place.
60,000
unconditional offers.
And they're probably all of them going to end up not paying back their student debt. So that's 50,000 times 60,000, which is what?
A lot.
That's a hell of a lot.
Yeah, but it's much more than that. There's 500,000 people, school leavers, about 1 million to A-levels, or something similar. About 500,000 will go to university.
Right.
Of those 500,000, around 200,000 will probably get serious degrees at reasonable universities and go on to get a job, or at least 250,000, probably closer to 300,000, will get hollowed out, devalued degrees from profit-seeking, third-rate institutions, and then go onto the jobs market with their massive debt that will hang over them for 30 years.
Okay.
And they won't get these jobs.
Let me guess how your book has been received by the further education sector.
Well, then there'll be total silence for a few minutes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, has anyone picked up on this?
No, I have contacted the Education Guardian 7 or 8 times about it. Nothing at all. The Times Higher Education Supplement, 7 or 8 times I've contacted them. No reply at all. Absolutely no interest at all from any. I've contacted all the teachers, magazines, the university lecturers magazines. Nobody has shown any interest at all in looking at the book, reading it, writing about it.
What about the education correspondents in the mainstream media? Anyone?
Tried them all.
What, even on the conservative newspapers, they're just not interested?
Well, I tried, I don't know what you call conservative, but on the Telegraph and the Times, I've tried those, and no response at all.
I tell you what, I'm almost thinking of cancelling my subscription to the Sunday Times just on the basis of their incredibly left-wing education correspondent. But I think they're all. You mentioned the Times and the Telegraph. Times used to be centre ground. Telegraph was explicitly conservative. Both are now, I'd say, soft left.
No,
pretty
but
much.
the Times is it's so Europhile,
Yeah.
and so hating Trump and Brexit.
We can come on to that. Yeah,
is just beyond belief.
Yeah.
There's not any attempt anymore at balanced journalism from the Times.
No. And the Telegraph, I think, keeps sort of shafting its readers, but by forcing them to read stories that they're imposing on them stories that they're really not interested in, usually about sort of gender and diversity and etc. etc. So, I thought you had something. You had an article somewhere, didn't you, covering this book?
Yes, the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail on a Saturday did a 2-page article about the book, which summarised what I was saying, but nobody else in the media has shown any interest at all. In fact, even on the day, or the 3 days before, and the day the A-level results came out, I contacted every single BBC local radio station. There's about 30 or 40 of them, and I actually managed to get a couple of minutes on 4 of them.
Yeah.
The rest had no interest at all.
You see, the longer I play this game, the more I realise that climate change is education, is pretty much every sector that you can name. All the big areas of public policy debate have been hijacked by I suppose what Trump would call the deep state. There's a kind of by the system of the liberal elite.
But there is now only one acceptable narrative on climate change, or on education, or on the National Health Service, or on any area of life. One narrative is acceptable. Everything else is either racist or knuckle-dragging ignorant.
Yeah. Meanwhile, real kids are being encouraged to waste their time at the taxpayer's expense. I mean, it's a lose-lose situation, isn't it? Everyone loses. The kids lose because they're wasting their time, not going to get decent jobs. The taxpayer loses because... And also the culture loses because what they're being indoctrinated with now is not just worthless, it's actually it's antithetical to our culture, no?
Yeah, remember, it's not the policy of half people going to university that is the problem. In fact, our employers are desperate for mathematicians, chemists, engineers. They're having to recruit abroad. In fact, the situation is so bad that the number of foreign academics teaching at British universities has gone up from 50,000 to 400,000. So the universities themselves don't even have confidence in the people that they're educating, because they're educating them in all this rubbish, soft subject, third-rate degrees which have been hollowed out anyway.
Yeah.
So absolutely, the way that the 50% going to university has been implemented by the profit-seeking, self-serving universities, that has been a disaster for Britain.
Yeah. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast, a Breitbart podcast, with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, David Craig, author of The Great University Con.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Censorship is a key issue here, particularly for people on the right. Do you think it was addressed adequately?
Definitely not. It was useful to name check Diamond and Silk. It was useful to check even politicians who had campaign ads that were shut down. But in every case, Zuckerberg was allowed to essentially dismiss the case and move on.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast, the Breitbart podcast, with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, David Craig. David, I only met you, I hadn't met you before, I met you off the train, but I quickly established that, like me, you're one of the few conservatives in Britain who will openly admit to being a fan of Donald Trump. Is that fair?
I wouldn't call myself a conservative.
Backtracking, I see, right. Classical liberal.
No, just common sense.
Right.
Because I've written books eviscerating Gordon Brown and Blair, but I've also written books eviscerating Cameron. So,
Well, that's not difficult, is it? I mean, Cameron was bloody useless. He was as bad as... He was the heir to Blair, indeed.
yeah, and a prolific liar, but like them all. So it's common sense, and Trump is playing a good game, and he's written all in the art of the deal. He's going to China and the EU, and he's saying, I'm tearing the whole thing up. So he, in the negotiation, he puts the extreme position. Everybody starts quickly backpedaling, and then they'll come to some compromise. Compared to 8 years of Obama, apart from getting a Nobel Peace Prize for being suntanned, I'm not actually sure what Obama achieved in 8 years.
No, indeed.
And Trump has done more in a few months than Mr. Obama did in his whole time at the White House.
Yes. So can I have a quick bitch about some of my... Because, look, you and I are... The analogy I always use is you know, we're kind of 101st Airborne or whatever. We're in our foxholes at the Battle of the Bulge. And there's not many of us. And we're all reliant on each other. And I look at some of the people on the right. For example, only the other day, Dan Hannan, who I like in so many respects and is a great articulator of conservative ideas, and he was one of the intellectual hearts of the Brexit movement. And he did yet another bloody piece distancing himself, sneering at, pouring scorn on Donald Trump. And I see my friend Toby Young doing it as well. Again, a great warrior in the culture wars, generally on my side. And there's a phenomenon that even university-educated people might be aware of called cognitive dissonance. It seems to me that if you look at Donald Trump's record so far, there is clear evidence that he's doing a great job in many, many areas. North Korea, in creating jobs, which is why his popularity among black people, for example, is a record, I think, since the 1950s for any Republican president. He's doing a pretty good job, and yet conservatives over here, or classical liberals, whatever, seem to want to use him to virtue signal their kind of reasonableness by showing, yeah, I'm a conservative, but I really hate this vulgar man who's president.
Absolutely. There is, again, one narrative, and that acceptable in society, in polite society, and that is that Donald Trump is some sort of madman. He's often compared to Hitler, which is totally absurd, and it is ludicrous, but it is throughout the even the, you might call the balanced media, the Times, the Telegraph, they're all spouting the same rubbish.
And the Mail. The Mail can't find a good word to say, but I think they have one license piece every 3 months saying, we know he's evil, we know he's a kind of borderline rapist and he hates women and he's insane, but he might just have done a couple of things right. They have that license piece just to show that they're not kind of totally out of touch with the world.
Yeah, there is one correct way of thinking nowadays that is acceptable.
Yeah.
Everything else is absolute proof that you are racist, a bigot, a little Englander, or some people of that ilk.
Yeah, I imagine you are, like me, a Brexiteer as well.
Yes, I wrote a book called The Great European Rip-Off. I went over to Brussels. I had a look at what was happening there. I was introduced to a number of journalists who are not allowed to write about what's happening at the European Union. If you're a credited journalist,
yes,
you're only allowed to write pro-EU stories.
How do they enforce that? Will they just remove your accreditation?
Well, because most of the media companies are getting money from Brussels. So, for example, I met people who write for the big German newspapers who are getting a lot of money from the Brussels Propaganda Brigade, and they will not publish any critical articles that criticize the European Union. And it's the same with most of the BBC, of course, gets getting millions from the Brussels Propaganda Office. So I was just amazed at what I saw there, and I knocked out this book in a couple of months. And obviously, I believe we desperately need to get out of that ghastly political construct that is the European Union.
Is it a reflection of the size of the sums being paid, or is it simply just goes to show how in a collapsing media industry how biddable newspapers are? I mean, are we talking sums that really make a difference, or is it just that that newspapers will sell their asses for peanuts these days?
I don't know. I found a couple of stories a few weeks ago which slightly surprised me. If you remember when single-sex marriage was introduced,
yes,
we were told by David Cameron, "I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do," and we all thought, "Whoa, what a tough guy!"
You may have done. I just thought, what a cuck.
But anyway,
yeah.
The French introduced it within a couple of months of Britain,
Right.
and so did a few other countries.
Oh yeah, and you had
Jerry
Adams going on stage in Belfast saying how much he'd always been a believer in gay marriage.
Right.
Yeah.
The reason that we introduced gay marriage was due to a ruling in the European Court of Human Rights that said that single-sex marriage was a human right.
Yeah.
However, getting married to an animal or pet was not yet a human right.
Right.
So the British government would have been sued if they had not approved gay marriage. But this was hidden from us. Not a single journalist mentioned it. And the next one I found was smart meters. Again, we're being told by our government it's their policy and they're going to help us save electricity. In fact, the whole thing's a complete fiasco.
Yes.
It's actually all due to a European Union directive that says that 80% of all energy users have to have smart meters installed by 2020. But our newspapers, and I've contacted a few journalists, they will tell us this, tell the truth, and nobody will mention that these policies have come from the European Union.
Because isn't part of the reason, I'm not saying it, I hate to play down the corruption argument, but isn't it partly that people just think, well, everyone on some level kind of instinctively knows this already, and as soon as you bring the word Europe into any article, people just go, their eyes glaze over. Isn't that part of the problem with Europe, that it's so all-encompassing and so dreary, it's designed to bore us into submission?
Or else that we've been programmed that as soon as somebody mentions the word EU or Europe,
like this, yes.
we are programmed to think, bigot, racist, knuckle dragger, little Englander.
Right.
So people don't bother. Why would you? If you mention it, why bother attracting insults and rocks being thrown at you?
You are right. Actually, that's a good point. You think about that phrase that David Cameron used: "Stop banging on about Europe," as though it encompassed the notion of being a headbanger, of somebody who was dreary and repetitive. If you talk about Europe, you're kind of an extreme, aren't you? You're part of the problem. Yeah, I see that. So what other evils did you just uncover on your foray into the EU? What else shocked you?
No, I mean the main thing it is a bureaucracy that is self-serving.
Yeah.
It has a theology which is more Europe is the solution to every single problem.
Yes.
More power must be given to the central authorities in Europe.
Yeah.
And it cannot relax this religion, because if the slightest crack appears, they're afraid that the whole thing will fall apart.
Yes.
And so they push this agenda. Whatever happens, the answer is always more Europe. Oh, and by the way, Mr. Juncker is not a drunk. He suffers from a bad back, but just happens to laugh as he falls over when he's at conferences.
Yes, yes.
But we all know this is his back that causes him to laugh, and not the excess of alcohol. Juncker and Merkel have done more to destroy the European Union than Farage or Hannan ever could.
Yes.
It is beyond belief. But they have the power, and they can do what they want.
Yes, they can. That's obvious.
Because they have the budget, and if Hungary says we don't want immigrants from certain places, the European Union say, fine, we're going to cut your budget.
Yes.
And given that Germany decides what happens in Europe. Surprise, surprise. Whatever Germany wants, that happens.
The thing about Juncker and his sciatica, I mean, the man is clearly got a terrible drinking problem, as you see when he insists on kissing all the world leaders and making just outrageously inappropriate remarks. Although inappropriate is the kind of word leftists use, so I'm going to retract that one. But it reminds me of that time in the Soviet Union where there was debate about whether or not Brezhnev was dead, whether it was just a sort of an embalmed figure standing on the rostrum at the May Day parade. And this idea that you can't tell the truth about the leader, it's like something out of a totalitarian regime.
Yes, I mean, 1984 is here. The truth is lies, and the lies are truth. Immigration is good for you is a truth.
Yes.
Of course, it's a lie, but it's a truth.
Diversity is strength.
Yes, multiculturalism is the way to enhance and improve our economic performance.
Yes.
In fact, the opposite is true. The multiculturalism is a source of conflict and social breakdown.
Yeah.
But of course, nobody can say that.
But
especially not our police chiefs.
But where do you see this all going, or don't you like to speculate on this? I mean, look, I've read a couple of your books. You did another one on government waste called Squandered, which was fantastic. It just gave the figures. I mean, that's what you do, isn't it? You don't really editorialise that much. You just say, here are the facts, make of them. You know, you argue with the facts if you will, but they're there in black and white.
That's right. There are enough people with opinions in the world.
Yeah.
So what I try to do in my books, without being boring, is provide the facts so that people can make up their own minds.
Yeah, but don't you feel like you're banging your head up against a brick wall? Because apart from me, okay, this podcast is massively successful and well loved and stuff, but it's like you're sowing your seeds on.
Well, let's say pearls before swine.
Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly.
Let's not talk about my seed.
No, right. Okay, so you're pearls before swine, but what are you? I mean, is there any hope?
My modest role is to look at what is happening, to find out the facts and provide them mainly in book form.
Yeah.
And then if people read the book or don't read it, if people want to take up, that is their job. When I wrote Squandered, I believe the Tories, this was when Brown was Chancellor, and I exposed him for being a complete fraud, economically illiterate, financially incompetent idiot. The Tories asked about 140 parliamentary questions based on my book. And
did they?
Yeah.
Oh.
And apparently not one made a dent in Brown, because Tories were so incompetent, so economically illiterate themselves.
They are.
They didn't manage to get through Gordon Brown's thick armour. It was beyond belief.
They still are economically illiterate, aren't they? I mean, I don't get any sense from Theresa May's government that they really understand that the job of Conservatives is to be fiscally responsible, that actually you get more productivity if you don't squander taxpayers' money on pointless make-work schemes and
yeah. Well, the
projects.
The standard calculation is for every pound in tax that we pay, you get about 46 pence of value, because so much is lost through collecting the tax, organising whatever you're going to spend it on, and that fritters away much of the tax. So taxing in order to spend is an incredibly inefficient way of using our money.
That's interesting. By the way, how can you? This isn't your living, is it? You just do this as a hobby. You can't do it for a living, because I can't imagine your books get bought by that many people.
No, I just do it for fun because I'm an angry person. So no,
you don't sound very angry, but maybe it's controlled anger. It's like the Hulk just before the Incredible Hulk just before he.
Yeah, I'm not going to quite go there. No, it is interesting to see what's really happening and to expose it, and it's kind of like a hobby.
But what was your career before you started dabbling in this as a sort of hobby?
I'm afraid I was what's called a management consultant
Right.
for about 25 years, and working mainly in Europe for some of the world's best management consultancies and some of the world's worst.
Right.
There's nothing much you can teach me about how to take money out of big companies' pockets or governments' pockets.
Right.
Because I've seen the real experts do it, and it is an extraordinary process. How it's difficult to get a small amount of money out of government or companies, but if you go in and say, I want $1 million, 5 million, 10 million, they'll give it to you. They don't really care. It's not their money anyway.
What are the? So this could be quite useful to me. What are the magic words you have to say in order to get these millions from these companies? How do you?
The trick we play is we say we've talked to your people and they're telling us this. Now, of course, we don't know if they're right or not because you may have a different view. However, what your people are saying is we need to do this, and this, and we believe we can help you do that and meet the requirements of your staff to improve efficiency, improve patient care, any of these wonderful things.
I see.
And as the executive group really don't, most executives don't even know what's happening in their companies. They don't know how to talk to the people. They only mix with their own type in their clubs and whatever. So they're quite happy to have someone else do the work that they're paid to do.
Right.
I mean, apparently, I found out an Oxford college recently paid management consultants many thousands of pounds, I don't know how much, to come up with a mission statement for the college. Now, I would have thought the mission statement would be fairly obvious, which is educate some people.
Yes.
But apparently the Vice-Chancellor and his team were so incompetent, so utterly unable to do the jobs that they're generously paid for, that they had to get management consultants to produce this mission statement.
Which college was this?
I'll find out this afternoon because I'm meeting the person who's going to tell me about it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That reminds me of one figure that stuck out from your book, that universities now spend £200 million a year on marketing, even though they know it has no effect, number one, and number two, they're competing with taxpayers' money to attract similarly talentless students. So that's right, isn't it?
Yes, there's about 200 million on marketing and another 60 million on agents who recruit foreign students because foreign students pay higher fees.
Yeah.
And there is one academic who has humbly suggested that the 200 million could be spent on better teaching and better facilities rather than on marketing brochures.
Can I ask you one thing before we go? Because I'm feeling quite peckish now. You said you're not hungry, but I am. Is when you were working in the corporate sector, did you have corporations over your working lifetime got more sclerotic and stupid and politically correct? Or did they always have this within them, this capacity for endless idiocy?
No, when I started in management consultancy, most managers didn't have any business qualifications, and so consultants could provide some value by helping with things like strategy, supply chain management, whatever. But what we've now got, pretty much throughout the public sector or the private sector, is we've got all these business school clones who've all learned the fancy strategy words and marketing words, but they. What the BBC used to call Bert speak when John Bert was in charge, a language that is used also by PR departments, which are incomprehensible to normal human beings, and these people, in a sense, can only speak and communicate with each other. There's a vast gulf between their management speak, their management gobbledygook, all about blue sky thinking or out of the box thinking and all that kind of rubbish. There's a vast gulf between them and their people. And this creates a huge opportunity for predators like management consultants, like I was, to move in and say, don't worry, you sit in your offices, we'll do your job for you. You just pay us a few million and nobody will know. It's you can have an easy life. So, and that's, you don't put it in those terms, of course. But I've sold about 100 consultancy projects, I think, or less, probably less than that. But absolutely, that is the message that you are subliminally giving is relax, go play golf, do what you want.
Yes.
We'll run
leave
things
it
for
to
you.
leave it to the big boys in the white shirts. And
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, in my next life, maybe I should just come back as a management consultant and just rip off large companies, exploit their stupidity.
Yeah, only if you want to spend your life talking to idiots.
Right. Okay. Well, milking idiots sounds quite fun. You were listening to the Delingpole podcast, a Breitbart production with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, David Craig, co-author of The Great University Con. Don't send your kids to university, folks. It's a complete waste of money. Thank you and goodbye.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
I want to actually take a couple of the references to Donald Trump from hip-hop. And then we're going to try to see if we can figure out why they like Donald Trump. Jay-Z said, I'm at the Trump International. Ask for me. Raekwon said, I'm the black Trump. They are comparing themselves to what he represents. His wealth, his achievement. Capitalism.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.